Addiction is never truly about the substance, it is about the split. The psyche does not crave alcohol, gambling, pills, or praise for their own sake. It craves what those things represent, a temporary escape from the unbearable weight of being divided inside. I have seen this countless times. In my work, the addict is not weak, the addict is wounded, not by the world alone, but by a disconnection from their own soul. And this is the truth many refuse to face. Addiction is not only a personal failing or a moral issue, it is a spiritual signal, a message from the unconscious that something vital is missing, repressed, or denied. Until that core truth is acknowledged, no amount of control, strategy, or abstinence will bring true healing. The form may change, from drugs to work, from alcohol to achievement, but the function remains the same, a coping mechanism to avoid a deeper pain. People ask me, what is this pain? It is the pain of not being whole. Every human being is born with a unique inner landscape, a set of instincts, desires, values, and truths, but few are allowed to live in alignment with that inner world. Instead, we adapt, we perform, we shrink, we become acceptable to the outer world by betraying the inner one. And when that betrayal goes on long enough, something inside begins to ache. That ache is the beginning of addiction, not the behavior itself, but the hunger for reunion with the lost self, the forgotten self, the real self. This is why addicts are often the most sensitive souls. They feel the dissonance of modern life more intensely than others. They feel the emptiness of roles, the hollowness of approval, the cruelty of indifference. They carry an unspoken grief for a life they never got to live, a self they never got to be, and so they seek, not in temples or philosophy, but in substances and compulsions, because those are faster, louder, easier to access. But the high never lasts, because the soul cannot be tricked. It knows the difference between temporary numbness and true union. I once said, every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether the narcotic be alcohol or idealism. That was not a condemnation, it was a diagnosis. Because the truth is, you can be addicted to almost anything. As long as it helps you avoid the inner truth, you can be addicted to helping others, to fixing people, to being seen as spiritual or successful. You can be addicted to silence, to chaos, to isolation or noise. You can even be addicted to healing itself, constantly searching, constantly self-improving, without ever sitting still enough to face the wound. And the wound is always the same. You have abandoned something within yourself, something essential, something sacred. It may have happened when you were young, when you realized that being your full self was not safe. It may have happened in your family, where love came with conditions and silence was safer than honesty. It may have happened over time, as the demands of adulthood slowly buried your inner world beneath responsibility and survival. Whatever the origin, the result is the same, a fragmentation. Part of you lives, part of you hides, and the space between those two becomes unbearable. That is the space addiction seeks to fill, not with meaning, but with distraction. And here is the paradox. Addiction, though destructive, is not senseless. It is a signal, a clue. It points directly to the wound, which means that healing does not begin with resistance, but with listening to the addiction without judgment, asking it not how do I stop you, but what are you protecting me from? What unbearable truth are you shielding me from feeling? When you ask this sincerely, the addiction loses power, not because it vanishes, but because it is seen, and what is seen can be integrated, but what is denied will always return in a new form, a new obsession, a new compulsion, because the psyche will always push us to reunite with what we've lost, even if it has to scream through dysfunction to be heard. This is why true healing is not linear. It is not a ladder upward, it is a spiral inward. It brings us back to the same places again and again until we are finally ready to feel what we once feared, to grieve what we once had to ignore, to reclaim what we once gave away. And this process is not glamorous, it is not fast, but it is real. It is the only thing that has ever worked, not in theory, but in the quiet lives of those who choose honesty over anesthesia. So if you find yourself entangled in addiction or haunted by a pattern you cannot break, do not ask what's wrong with me. Ask what is unhealed in me. Ask what part of me have I disowned, and where is it trying to come home? Because beneath every addiction is a sacred longing, a longing to remember who you were before the world told you to be someone else. And when that longing is honored, not silenced, when that forgotten self is welcomed back from exile, the addiction begins to loosen its grip, not through force, but through reunion. If we are to truly understand addiction, we must speak not only of the symptom, but of the archetype. Because at the root of every compulsion is an archetypal hunger, a yearning not simply for comfort, but for contact with something eternal. The addict in this way is a kind of seeker. But unlike the mystic who seeks the divine with reverence, the addict seeks it with urgency. He does not bow to the mystery, he swallows it. Not because he is evil or foolish, but because he is desperate to escape the confines of a life that no longer feels bearable. And what makes a life unbearable? A life where the inner world is silenced, where the authentic self is exiled, where the child within was never witnessed, only judged, ignored, or molded. In many addicts, I have seen this, a forgotten child inside still crying for what was never received. Not pleasure, not excitement, but presence. Someone who would say, I see you, you matter, you are enough as you are. When that presence is missing in childhood, the psyche creates substitutes. Addiction is one such substitute, a loyal companion that never abandons, never critiques, always soothes. But it also always betrays, because what it promises, wholeness, it can never deliver. The bottle may silence the noise, the pill may dissolve the tension, the screen may distract from the ache, but none of it brings you back to yourself, because the self, the true self, lives behind the pain, and to reach it you must walk through what you've avoided. This is the heart of shadow work. I have often said that healing is not about becoming good, it is about becoming whole. That wholeness demands that you reclaim every exiled piece of yourself, the ashamed one, the angry one, the terrified one, the addicted one, not to justify their behavior, but to understand their purpose. Because every shadow has a function. The addiction was not born to destroy you. It was born to protect you from a truth you once could not bear. And if you approach it with compassion, not indulgence but sincere curiosity, it will reveal its roots. I recall a patient who had been drinking heavily for years. He did not know why. He believed he was weak, but under hypnosis, he remembered a moment, age 6, when his father told him, "Real men don't cry." That was the moment he split from himself, the moment he buried his sensitivity, and years later he drank not for joy but to suppress the part of him that still wept silently inside. When I helped him grieve that memory, not just intellectually but somatically, the craving changed, not vanished, but weakened because the source of pain was no longer unconscious. This is the key. Addiction thrives in the dark. But once you bring the root into light, not with shame, but with clarity, it begins to unravel. And here, a warning. Do not romanticize pain. Do not glorify addiction as some spiritual gift. It is a wound, but it is also a map, and only if you follow it carefully, with the help of grounded support, presence, and inner truth, will it lead you back to your soul. Because that is what the addict is ultimately seeking, not the drug, not the thrill, but the reunion with the lost soul, the part of themselves they abandoned, often because the world gave them no other choice. In my work, I saw this again and again. Brilliant minds, sensitive hearts, creative spirits, all numbed because their essence was too much for a society that worships conformity. They did not become addicted because they were broken. They became addicted because they felt too deeply and had nowhere safe to feel. So they found control in the uncontrollable. They found relief in destruction, until the day came when the very thing that soothed them became the very thing that trapped them. And that is the moment of awakening, not when they hit rock bottom, but when they finally say, "I am ready to feel what I was once too afraid to feel." That is the beginning of real recovery. Not recovery from the addiction, but recovery of the self that was left behind in childhood, the self that was too intense, too intuitive, too sensitive, too honest, the self that still waits. Addiction is the scar tissue over a soul that was never allowed to breathe. And when you choose to breathe again, slowly, painfully, honestly, the scar begins to soften. You remember who you were before the addiction, and not just who, but why. Why you split, why you numbed, why you ran, and most importantly, why you no longer have to. The path of healing from addiction is not heroic in the way most imagine. It is not a battle of willpower. It is not a story of conquering the self. It is a quiet reckoning, a slow return, and most of all, it is a decision to stop lying, to stop pretending, to stop negotiating with the inner voice that says, "This isn't me, this isn't the life I came here to live." Because that voice, faint as it may seem, is the voice of the soul. The soul does not scream, it does not plead, it whispers and it waits. It waits for you to choose truth over escape, presence over distraction, responsibility over blame. And when you do, when you make that sacred decision, not once but daily, something begins to shift. You begin to remember what it feels like to feel not just joy or peace, but grief, anger, longing, disappointment, all the colors of your full emotional spectrum, no longer numbed, no longer distorted, and it is overwhelming at first, like waking from anesthesia. But it is also the beginning of freedom. You begin to notice the pattern, not just in yourself but in the world, how society sells addiction in shiny forms, in success, productivity, constant entertainment. You begin to see that what once seemed normal was never natural, and that awakening is painful because it reveals how much of your life was built around avoidance. But it is also powerful because it shows you that you are no longer willing to live asleep. This is why I have said people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But you must do the opposite. You must become the one who chooses to face it, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because the soul is not fragile, it has simply been forgotten. And every time you choose to feel instead of flee, you remember, you remember, you bring the dismembered pieces of yourself back into wholeness. This is the real meaning of healing, not becoming perfect, not eliminating all pain, but becoming whole. Let us be clear. Addiction is not something to be judged, it is something to be understood, because behind every addiction is a story, and every story is sacred. When you trace the roots of your addiction, you will find wounds that were never witnessed, fears that were never spoken, and needs that were never met. You will find a younger version of yourself who did not know how to survive, except by reaching for something that made it all go away. And in that moment, you will feel something unexpected: compassion. Compassion for the one who coped the only way they knew how. Compassion for the one who carried too much for too long. Compassion for the one who never felt safe enough to simply be. That compassion is not weakness, it is alchemy. It is the force that transforms the cycle of addiction into the path of integration. And it is only through this lens, of clarity, courage, and compassion, that true transformation becomes possible. There is no shortcut, there is no formula. Only the slow, sacred work of returning to the self, day by day, choice by choice. And with every return, the need to escape diminishes. Not because you are resisting it harder, but because there is less to escape from, because you are finally home, not in a house, not in a role, but in your own soul. So, let this be the truth you carry forward. Addiction is not your identity, it is your invitation. Your soul is not broken, it is buried, and every craving is a call to excavate it. You were never meant to live numb, you were meant to live fully, and though the journey is hard, it is yours, and no one, no system, no substance, no shadow can take that from you unless you give it away. Choose again and again to come back, because healing does not mean the pain is gone. It means the pain is no longer in charge.